I was mowing the front lawn when I saw her walking up the driveway in those ridiculous kitten heels, clipboard in hand like she was storming the beaches of Normandy. Janice Appleton, president of the Willow Heights HOA and self-declared queen of the block. Her frosted bob bounced with every angry step. I killed the mower and pulled off my gloves. "Darren Dorsey," she barked, as if I'd committed a felony by existing. "We need to talk about your sister's van." Again, I didn't even try to hide the eye roll. "What now, Janice?" "It's been parked in the same spot for 3 days. That's against HOA guidelines. We've had complaints." "She's disabled, Janice. That's her spot. We cleared it with the city. You know this." Janice's nostrils flared like a bull. "It's an eyesore. People are talking." "This isn't a hospital lot, Darren. It's a community." She turned and strutted off before I could fire back. Typical. My sister, Jenna, had been in a car accident a few years back, left her in a wheelchair. She lived with me now, and I'd poured money into making the house accessible. Ramp, widened doorways, the whole deal. But none of that mattered to Janice. She'd been gunning for us ever since I refused to pay a fine for leaving my trash bins out for an extra hour last year. I figured it was just more HOA noise. Until 2 nights later. I was out in the garage working on the lawnmower when I heard the thumping of engines. Loud ones. I stepped outside and spotted 6 guys on bikes rolling down the street, not the weekend warrior kind either. These were leather-clad, tattoo-covered, chain-wearing types. They stopped. Right in front of my house. One of them, massive, with a beard that looked like it could hide a raccoon, revved his engine and pointed at Jenna's van. "Move that piece of junk or we will." I stepped forward. "You got a problem?" Another one, bald with mirrored shades, laughed. "We're doing a favor for someone who says this van's an embarrassment to the neighborhood. Maybe you've heard of her, Janice Appleton?" They weren't subtle. One of them even had a patch on his vest that said HOA Enforcers. I kid you not. I knew this wasn't just intimidation. It was harassment. And it wasn't random. Janice had sent them. She'd weaponized a biker gang against my disabled sister. "Get off my property," I said, jaw tight. Beard guy spat on my driveway. "We'll be back tomorrow. That van better be gone." I waited until they left, then I made one phone call. "Hey, Daniel. You and David busy this week?" My twin brother's former Navy SEALs. Quiet, deadly, and very, very protective of Jenna. Daniel's voice was calm. "We'll be there by morning." I hung up and looked out at the street where the bikers had idled. Janice had no idea what she'd just triggered. By 6:30 the next morning, Daniel and David pulled up in a dusty black SUV that looked like it had survived a war zone and probably had. They didn't say much when they got out. They didn't need to. Both of them carried that calm, watchful energy that made people uneasy without knowing why. They gave Jenna quiet hugs and then started walking the perimeter of the property, studying everything from the fence line to the angle of the streetlights. David pointed toward the neighbor's second-story window. "You've got a blind spot behind the van. Anyone crouching back there wouldn't be seen from the house." "You expecting them to sneak around?" I asked. Daniel didn't look up from his notepad. "If they came once, they'll come again. But next time, no engines, no noise. They'll try something subtle." That afternoon, I drove into town and came back with 4 motion sensor floodlights, a new set of high-res security cameras, and a folder from the county courthouse. I handed it to Daniel. He flipped through the documents. HOA charter, enforcement bylaws, and... "What's this?" "Public records." I tapped the back pages. "Guess whose name is on the deed for the empty lot behind Janice's house?" David raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me." "Her husband's business. He's been leasing it to the HOA for storage at triple market rate." "That's misappropriation of dues." Daniel closed the folder. "That's leverage." By sundown, we'd wired the yard with sensors and cameras. The feeds were hooked up to a monitor in the garage where David sat with a mug of coffee and a notepad, watching like a hawk. Daniel went over the security footage from the night the bikers showed up, slowing it down frame by frame. He paused on one face. "I know this guy," he muttered. "You sure?" Daniel nodded. "Did ops in Kandahar with local contractors. This guy was freelance security." Got caught running an extortion ring on base, disappeared before they could court-martial him. I whistled low. You think Janice knows who she's hiring? I doubt she even asked. That night, nothing happened. But the next morning, I woke up to find the left side of Jenna's van keyed from bumper to tail light. Deep gouges. Someone had taken their time. Jenna stared at it in silence. Her knuckles were white on the wheels of her chair. I'm fine, she said too quickly. You're not. David stepped back from the van and held up his phone. Got him. Camera caught everything. The footage showed a man in a leather vest crouching beside the van at 2:46 a.m. He spent almost 5 minutes carving into the paint with what looked like a screwdriver. Then he walked off toward the east exit of the neighborhood. Daniel recognized him immediately. Same guy from Kandahar, name's Elias Crane. I called the police and handed over the footage. They took it seriously, especially after Daniel showed them the contractor's military record and the connection to overseas offenses. An officer took Jenna's statement and promised to follow up. 2 hours later, we got a call from a detective. You might want to come down to the station, he said. We pulled Crane in. He's not talking, but his phone records are. Interesting. Daniel and I drove down. The detective, a broad man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, slid a printout across the table. Crane received 5 calls from one number the day before the first incident. That number belongs to a landline registered to a business called Willow Heights Civic Coordination Office. Sound familiar? Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's the HOA's operating name. The detective nodded. We're opening a formal investigation into the HOA's leadership. If you have anything else that could help, now's the time. I handed him the folder of public records. Check the lot behind 312 Maple Ridge. Janice's husband leases it to the HOA at 3 times the going rate. That's how she keeps the budget looking maxed out while nothing gets done. 2 days later, the storm broke. The police raided the HOA's office, really just a glorified shed behind Janice's house, and seized 4 boxes of documents and a desktop computer. Janice was escorted out in handcuffs, her manicure chipped and her voice shrill as she shouted about misunderstandings and political vendettas. While that unfolded, Daniel and David stayed busy. They tracked down the rest of the biker crew, not with fists or threats, but by using quiet connections. A friend of David's from his time in the Navy now ran a private security firm. He pulled background on every member of the group that had shown up at our house. What surfaced was a mess. 3 of them had outstanding warrants for assault. 1 was breaking parole just by crossing state lines, and 2 were tied to a string of intimidation for hire cases in nearby counties. David handed everything over to the police with a neat little summary signed and notarized. The fallout was fast. Arrests. Charges. One of the bikers flipped immediately, confirming that Janice had paid him in cash to apply pressure to our household. She'd even drawn him a map of our property. Daniel taped that map to the wall of the garage. That's not pressure, he said flatly. That's a blueprint for a break-in. The neighborhood started shifting within days. People who'd once been Janice's biggest supporters started knocking on our door with apologies and questions. One guy, Pete from 3 doors down, even brought over a tray of lasagna. I didn't know how far she'd gone, he said. I thought she was just strict. She was criminal, I corrected, and left it at that. The HOA board dissolved within a week. The remaining members either resigned or were removed by emergency vote. The city stepped in to conduct an audit of the association's finances, and what they found made headlines: embezzlement, fraudulent invoices, and over $100,000 in unaccounted dues. As for Jenna, she got an official apology from the city. The mayor himself called to assure us that ADA compliance would be enforced in all neighborhood policies going forward. The van was repaired at no cost, courtesy of a local dealership who'd seen the story on the news. Daniel and David didn't stick around for the media circus. They left quietly one morning after a breakfast of black coffee and eggs. David left a note on the fridge. Next time someone messes with our sister, they better bring a lawyer. Or a priest. That evening, I pulled the map off the garage wall, folded it, and burned it in the fire pit out back. The cameras stayed up, though. So did the motion lights. Just because the queen had fallen didn't mean the game was over. But now, at least, we knew how to play it. The first city council meeting after Janice's arrest was packed. Every seat in the municipal building's chamber was taken, and people stood shoulder to shoulder along the back wall. Some had never shown up to a meeting in years. Others, like the Carsons and the Nguyens, sat with folded arms and grim expressions, their faith in neighborhood leadership clearly shattered. I signed in at the front with Jenna beside me. Her chair whirred softly as we made our way down the aisle. The mayor spotted us and gave a curt nod. He didn't smile, no one did. Not tonight. Daniel and David stayed back near the exit, scanning the room without being obvious about it. They weren't expecting trouble, but they weren't assuming peace either. The council chair, a man with thinning hair and a tie that had seen better decades, tapped the microphone. We're here to review the findings of the city audit into the Willow Heights Homeowners Association and determine next steps regarding future governance, restitution, and criminal referrals. The room stiffened. A woman from the finance department took the floor, flipping open a binder as thick as a dictionary. We found falsified invoices submitted over a 5-year period, most of which were approved solely by the HOA president. These included inflated landscaping contracts, non-existent security patrols, and repeated maintenance charges for repairs that were never completed. She turned a page. Additionally, funds were withdrawn from the HOA reserve account and redirected to a shell company registered under Roger Appleton's name, the husband of the former president. Gasps rippled through the room. Jenna's face didn't change. She just leaned forward slightly, listening. The finance director continued, voice steady. We estimate the total misappropriated funds at just over $142,000. We've referred the matter to the district attorney for prosecution. Pete Carson stood up from the third row. What about our dues? What about the roads that haven't been repaved in 10 years? The mayor raised a hand. We're reviewing the legal options for restitution, including asset seizure from the Appleton estate. But let's be clear, this will take time. What we can do immediately is vote to dissolve the HOA and appoint a temporary neighborhood committee. A few people clapped, most didn't. The mood was too raw for celebration. Then a tall man in a dark suit approached the dais. He introduced himself as Assistant District Attorney Mark Velez. I'll be brief, he said. We've filed charges against Janice Appleton for conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of public funds, and criminal harassment. We've also issued warrants for 3 individuals hired to conduct intimidation on her behalf. One of those individuals is already in custody. The other 2 are being tracked. He paused, then added, let me be clear. This was not just corruption. This was organized criminal behavior hiding behind a homeowners association, and we will treat it as such. The chamber erupted into a mixture of murmurs and stunned silence. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the exit. After the meeting, I stepped outside with Jenna. The air was cool and the street lamps buzzed faintly. People were gathering in small clusters, talking in low voices. Some nodded to us as we passed. Others looked away, embarrassed. At the curb, a man was waiting. Mid-40s, suit too sharp for this town. He introduced himself as Agent Clay from the State Bureau of Investigation. I'd like a word, he said. Privately. Daniel and David flanked us, silent. Clay didn't flinch. Off the record, then. We led him back to our driveway. Once there, he took out a small recorder and placed it on the hood of my truck. We've been watching Willow Heights for a while, he said. Not because of the HOA, because of the property adjacent to it. I frowned. The vacant parcel behind Janice's? He nodded. That's not just a storage lot. It's a former construction staging area for a development that never happened. But we've traced wire transfers between the HOA's account and an entity that was moving cash through that land. We're talking about laundering, David crossed his arms, so Janice wasn't just skimming dues. Clay looked at him. She was facilitating a pipeline. Money came in through fake fines, inflated contracts, and other HOA grift. It got cleaned through phony vendors and then moved on. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Where to? Clay hesitated. We're not sure, some of it went overseas, Cyprus, the Caymans. But here's where it gets worse. One of the beneficiaries is tied to a security firm flagged for paramilitary activity in South America. I stepped forward. Are you saying this was bigger than just local fraud? Clay nodded once. Much bigger. And very likely Janice didn't understand who she was dealing with. She thought she was running a racket. In reality, she was a pawn. Jenna's voice was quiet. So what happens now? We need more evidence, Clay said. The kind that might be buried in those files you mentioned. The ones your brother collected on the biker crew? David went into the garage and returned with a sealed envelope. He handed it over. Clay flipped it open, scanned the contents, and let out a low whistle. This is cleaner than anything we've got. You did this yourselves, Daniel nodded. We've dealt with worse. Clay gave a tight nod. If this checks out, you'll have helped dismantle something very ugly. You'll also have painted a target on yourselves. I met his gaze. We're used to that. For the next week, the neighborhood was quieter than it had ever been. No patrols. No warning letters. The HOA sign at the front entrance was removed. Jenna spent her afternoons outside reading, unbothered for the first time in months. But then, 2 nights later, the cameras caught something strange. A man in a maintenance vest walked past the house at 2 in the morning. He didn't touch anything, didn't look directly at the property. Just walked by, passed under the streetlight, and vanished past the bend. We played the footage back. The vest had a logo, Sable Ridge Property Management. None of us had heard of it. David pulled records. The company didn't exist in the state registry, but the logo matched one that appeared on a forged invoice in the HOA books. Daniel called Clay. You said Janice didn't know who she was dealing with. I think someone's still watching. Clay showed up the next morning with 2 agents. They swept the block, questioned half a dozen residents, and found a GPS tracker planted under one of our trash bins. We need to move fast, Clay said. Whatever this is, it's not over. The next 48 hours were a blur, subpoenas, depositions. Clay's team moved in on the shell companies one by one. 3 more arrests followed, including one of the supposed contractors who'd been billing the HOA for lawn care. He turned out to be a courier for a laundering network tied to offshore gambling operations. And behind it all, the same name kept popping up, Sable Ridge. They weren't a property firm. They were a front. And the deeper Clay's team dug, the more it became clear Janice had opened a door no one was supposed to find. We sat on the back patio that evening, the 4 of us. Jenna sipped tea while Daniel cleaned his pocket knife. David had his laptop open, tracing connections between shell companies. I watched the street, waiting. You think this ends soon? I asked. Daniel didn't look up. No, but it gets quieter before it gets louder. Jenna turned her head. I want to help. You already did, David said without looking up. You stayed. That's more than most. Later that night, Clay called with one final update. We've confirmed that Sable Ridge was using the HOA as a prototype, he said. They've tried the same model in 3 other communities. You exposed their test run. I let that sink in. So what now? I asked. Now we bring it all down. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. The federal subpoenas landed hard. By the following week, the Department of Justice had stepped in quietly at first. A pair of unmarked black Tahoes rolled into the county courthouse one morning, and agents from the Organized Crime Task Force filed into Judge Harlan's chambers with a sealed folder. Within hours, a gag order was issued on all public records tied to the former Willow Heights HOA. The investigation was no longer local. Daniel and David had been expecting it. They'd seen operations like this before, small, seemingly petty schemes hiding the roots of something much uglier. That kind of rot didn't stop at city lines. It tunneled deep. The house became a staging ground. Not for war, exactly, but for information. David's laptop was now linked to a secure network provided by Clay's team. Daniel kept in touch with a contact from his time in Bahrain, someone with access to financial tracing tools that weren't exactly legal, but never incorrect. One name kept emerging, attached to dozens of shell companies buried inside HOA vendor contracts. RM Holdings. Registered in Nevada, no public officers listed. But Daniel traced one of its sub-accounts to a payment made to an American contractor operating in Bogotá. That same contractor had provided logistics for a now defunct private military company 5 years earlier, one that had been blacklisted for training paramilitaries in Honduras. Clay sat at our kitchen table, his tie loosened, staring at the printout. "This isn't just a HOA gone rogue," he said. "It's a laundering funnel." They were testing whether neighborhood associations could be used as legitimate fronts for organized finance movement. Janice didn't create it, she was therein. Jenna looked up from her notebook. "Why here?" Clay pointed at the documents. "Affluent enough to justify high dues, isolated enough to avoid scrutiny. But not so wealthy that residents have private counsel reviewing every policy. It's the perfect gray zone." That night the house phone rang. It was a landline we rarely used. Jenna answered before we could stop her. She didn't say anything, just held the receiver to her ear. After about 10 seconds, she set it down gently. Daniel walked over. "What did they say?" Jenna looked down at her hands. "They said the van was just a warning. Next time it'll be the ramp. We checked the cameras. Nothing. No movement. No unusual vehicles. But David noticed something else. The feed from the west side where the ramp connected to the sidewalk had been offline for 56 minutes earlier that day. The footage resumed just as normal movement returned, but the gap was undeniable. Daniel pulled the housing off the camera casing. Inside, the wire had been cut and resoldered. Clean work, barely visible, almost surgical. "These people aren't bikers anymore," he said. "They're professionals." We notified Clay. Within an hour, a surveillance van was parked 2 blocks down with a rotating team of agents inside. Unmarked, but obvious to anyone paying attention. What happened next wasn't subtle. At 2:17 the next morning, a package was left at our doorstep. Plain brown box, no markings. Jenna spotted it first on the morning feed, flagged it, and called me before I'd even finished brushing my teeth. Daniel didn't touch it. He stood 10 feet back and used a mirror to check the underside. A small wire ran from the box to a pressure sensor beneath the flap. Classic trigger. He called in the bomb squad. They arrived without sirens, but the flashing lights still woke up half the block. A containment robot removed the package and took it to the mobile unit. 20 minutes later, the technician gave a short nod to Clay. "It wasn't active," Clay explained. "No explosive material, just wires, a timer, and a voice recorder, meant to intimidate, not detonate." David leaned against the porch railing. "That confirms it. They're not trying to disappear, they're trying to shut us up." Clay made a call. That afternoon, the U.S. Marshal Service placed our entire household under temporary protective surveillance. A mobile command unit was stationed at the end of the street. Jenna's van was relocated to a secure location, and the ramp was reinforced with retractable steel bollards. Still, the pressure didn't stop. Neighbors began receiving anonymous letters. Some were threats, others were bribes, promises of reduced dues or restored privileges if they refused to testify. Pete Carson brought his to us in a sealed envelope, trembling. "They're trying to buy silence," he said. "They used to send newsletters. Now they send hush money." Clay's team traced the letters to a print shop 40 miles out. That shop was owned by a limited partnership tied to once again RM Holdings. The case was building faster than anyone expected. Then came the break. A ledger was found inside a storage unit rented under Janice's maiden name. It was handwritten, old school, and damning. Every payment, every fake vendor, every bonus paid out to enforcers. But more importantly, it listed a name no one had seen yet, Victor Raum, CEO RM Holdings. Not much was known about Raum. A former diplomat turned private equity ghost, he'd been off the radar for years. Clay's team submitted the ledger as evidence to a federal grand jury within 72 hours. An indictment followed in less than a week. Raum was apprehended in a private terminal at the Miami International Airport. He was carrying 2 burner phones and a passport under the alias Martin DeSoto. When questioned, he tried to invoke diplomatic immunity only to discover his former host country had revoked it 2 years earlier, quietly and without ceremony. With Raum in custody, the network began to unravel. Subpoenas led to contractors in 3 other states. 2 of the biker enforcers flipped under federal protection, confirming that their roles were to intimidate non-compliant homeowners and extract compliance fees under the guise of late dues. One of them admitted to being paid in cryptocurrency through a wallet tied to a Russian exchange. The DOJ held a press conference that following month. Standing behind the podium, Clay laid out the charges: conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud, extortion, money laundering, and operating an unregistered financial entity across state lines. Janice, already facing state charges, was now under federal indictment as a co-conspirator. Back in Willow Heights, the HOA was officially dissolved by court order. Remaining funds were seized and redistributed to affected residents. Jenna received a personal letter from the state attorney general recognizing her courage and cooperation. "You started this," I told her one night as we sat on the porch. She shook her head. "I just refused to move the van." That was enough. Daniel and David didn't stay long after the dust settled. They weren't ones for praise or parades. They left quietly, leaving behind only a thumb drive of encrypted files in case we ever needed them again. The neighborhood was different now. The fear was gone, replaced by something cautious but hopeful. A new community council was formed, not an HOA, just neighbors, elected voluntarily. Their first vote was unanimous: no fees, no fines, no enforcement, only assistance when needed. Pete volunteered to build a new community ramp for Jenna, wider, better lit, and lined with flower beds. The cameras stayed up, not out of fear but as a quiet reminder, because power, once abused, always leaves a shadow. But this time the neighborhood wasn't in that shadow. We were past it. And we had the footage to prove it.